A scream echoes through the street, sending a chill through the air. Sophia collapses in panic, her eyes locked on Charlie, her loyal companion, lying motionless on the ground. The officer, someone she trusted to protect, is the one who caused this pain. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The scream echoed down Main Street in Springfield, loud enough to silence conversations and draw everyone's attention. Sophia was on the ground, her face pale, her hands trembling as she tried to reach Charlie, who was whimpering softly a few feet away. The small dog's body was motionless, and for a moment, she thought he had stopped breathing. Everything had happened too fast. A police officer who was supposed to protect had just kicked her best friend. The scene felt surreal, but the cold stare of the man standing in front of her said otherwise. Sophia felt her chest tighten. Shock kept her from speaking or reacting for a few seconds. Then the pain turned into desperation. She crawled toward Charlie, ignoring the crowd that was beginning to gather around them. "My God, Charlie," she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. He was still alive but could barely move. His eyes, usually full of life, now showed fear and pain. Sophia felt a wave of fury and helplessness wash over her. How could anyone do this to such a small, innocent creature? The officer said nothing. He didn't apologize or try to help. He just crossed, his arms as if certain his actions were justified. Sophia felt the tears burning her eyes, but she couldn't waste time there. Struggling to her feet, she picked Charlie up in her arms, ignoring the pain in her back and legs. The little dog's weight had never felt so heavy before, but it was the weight of urgency that pushed her forward. She knew every second was crucial. Running down the street, Sophia could barely think. People stared. Some asked if she needed help, but she didn't stop to answer. The veterinary clinic was a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. "Hold on, Charlie," she said between sobs, her voice breaking as she felt the warmth of his body beginning to fade. The thought of losing him was unbearable. He was all she had. Finally, the clinic doors came into view, and Sophia practically burst through them. "Help! Please, he's dying!" Her voice was desperate, and the sound echoed off the cold white walls of the clinic. A receptionist rushed to help her, calling the vet immediately. Sophia handed Charlie over to the staff, but a sense of emptiness overwhelmed her the moment she let go. It was as if a part of her had been ripped away. She collapsed into one of the waiting room chairs, her hands covering her face. She tried to pray, even though she wasn't sure exactly to whom. All she wanted was to hear that he would be okay, that the injuries weren't as bad as they seemed, but the silence of the clinic was deafening. Sophia glanced at the clock on the wall, watching the minutes drag by like hours. Every second was torture. Finally, the vet appeared. He had a serious expression, and Sophia felt her heart sink. He explained that the injuries were critical, mentioning severe internal damage that could lead to a slow and painful death for Charlie. Sophia heard the words, but her mind refused to process them. Euthanasia. The words seemed to echo, piercing her soul. "No, he's strong. He'll survive," she said, almost shouting. But reality seemed relentless. Sophia knew she needed time to think, but time wasn't on her side. Looking at Charlie now, sedated and motionless on the table, she felt a decision forming within her. If no one was willing to save Charlie, she would do it herself. Even if she had to move mountains, even if she had to defy every rule or piece of advice, no matter the cost, she wouldn't let her friend go without a fight. Sophia left the clinic as a fugitive with Charlie in her arms and a heavy heart. The vet had told her she was being irrational, that there was nothing more to be done, but she couldn't accept that. Charlie was more than a dog. He was the reason she kept waking up every morning, the one she made coffee for and opened the windows to let the sunlight in. He was her constant companion, the only one who filled the deafening silence in the house since the death of her husband, Arthur. As she walked through the streets, Sophia tried to gather her thoughts. She didn't have a clear plan, just a vague idea about that distant clinic she had heard about in a conversation at the market weeks ago. They said they did experimental treatments there, something advanced but expensive. She didn't know exactly where it was or how she would get there, but she decided it didn't matter. What mattered was keeping Charlie alive, even if it meant walking to the other side of town. The weight of him in her arms seemed to grow with every step, but she didn't complain. She stopped at a park bench to catch her breath, feeling her legs tremble with exhaustion. Charlie was quiet, but his irregular breathing made her look at him with growing worry. He had always been full of energy, running around the backyard and chasing the birds that dared to land on the fence. Seeing him so fragile now felt like a punch to the gut. Sophia closed her eyes and tried to hold back the tears. She couldn't afford to break due. An older woman passing by noticed her state and offered help. Sophia, with a lump in her throat, quickly explained the situation. The woman moved with compassion, gave her a bottle of water and some cookies. "You need strength to take care of him," she said, squeezing Sophia's hand before walking away. That small act of kindness renewed her determination. Sophia drank the water, ate a piece of cookie, and kept walking. Every step felt like a marathon, but she didn't stop. When she reached the bus stop, Sophia realized she had a problem. She didn't have enough money for the fare. All she had was the little she had managed to save to pay the vet, and now it was useless. Feeling lost, she sat in a corner, holding Charlie carefully. He felt lighter than before, and that scared her. "Please hold on a little longer," she whispered, feeling the warmth of his body against her chest. It was almost as if Charlie understood, because he moved his head slightly, leaning into her. It was then that a young taxi driver who had stopped there to smoke a cigarette noticed Sophia and approached. He asked if she needed help, and Sophia told her story in a few words, not hiding her tears. The man, surprised, said he would take her wherever she needed to go, even if she couldn't pay. Sophia was speechless. "Just get in, ma'am. Don't worry about it now," he said, helping her settle Charlie carefully in the back seat. The ride was silent. The driver seemed to understand that Sophia needed peace. He drove carefully, glancing in the rearview mirror from time to time to make sure she was okay. Meanwhile, Sophia kept her eyes fixed on Charlie, checking his breathing every minute. The journey was long, and she didn't know if they were going in the right direction, but the simple fact of being in motion made her feel like there was still hope. Every kilometer traveled felt like a victory. When they finally arrived at the address she had scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper, Sophia felt a mix of relief and fear. The clinic looked modest, almost unassuming, but something about the sign at the entrance gave her hope. She thanked the driver with the sincerity of someone who had just received an invaluable gift. "You saved 2 lives today," she said, shaking his hand before getting out of the car. With Charlie in her arms, she walked through the clinic's door, praying that this would be the answer she had been searching for. The waiting room at the clinic was small and simple, with plastic chairs and a table covered in old magazines. There was a faint smell of disinfectant in the air, mingling with the distant sound of a radio playing a song Sophia didn't recognize. She approached the reception desk holding Charlie carefully. "Please, I need urgent help. My dog is really sick," she said, her voice trembling. The receptionist looked at her and, without hesitation, asked her to wait a moment while she called the vet. Sophia sat in one of the chairs, observing the small details of the room as if trying to distract herself from the gravity of the situation. A poster on the wall talked about the importance of spaying and neutering pets, and there was a photograph of a group of veterinarians smiling next to a 3-legged dog. Despite the simplicity of the place, Sophia felt she was in the right place. Maybe it was desperation turning into hope, but she clung to that feeling with all her strength. Soon, a short man in a white coat appeared. He introduced himself as Dr. Moretti and asked to see Charlie. Sophia followed him to a small examination room. The space was cramped with a metal table in the center and equipment that looked older than she had expected. The doctor asked her to place Charlie on the table. He examined the dog calmly, but his serious expression made her hold her breath. "He's very weak," he finally said as he checked the animal's vital signs. Sophia knew that, but hearing those words made her heart tighten even more. Dr. Moretti asked a few quick questions, trying to understand what had happened. Sophia told him everything in detail, from the police officer's attack to the refusal to accept euthanasia at the previous clinic. He listened in silence, nodding occasionally. After a few minutes, he said, "I'll be honest with you. The chances are slim, but there's something we can try. It's risky, but if you're willing to fight for him, I am too." Those words were a breath of life for Sophia. "I'll do anything. Just save my Charlie," she replied, gripping his hand tightly. The experimental treatment would require a delicate surgery, something Sophia had never heard of before. Dr. Moretti explained that the procedure involved techniques still under study, but could offer a small chance of saving Charlie. He made it clear there were no guarantees, but Sophia didn't hesitate for a second. He deserves every possible chance, she said as she signed the necessary papers. While the doctor prepared to begin, Sophia was led back to the waiting room. Time seemed to drag. Every minute in the hard chair was agony. Sophia stared at the door to the surgery room as if her life depended on it. A few people came and went from the clinic with their own pets, but nothing else seemed to matter. Memories of Charlie running through the yard, lying on the couch to watch TV with her, or bringing his favorite toy to play, flashed through Sophia's mind like scenes from a movie she feared she'd never see again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Moretti appeared at the door. His face looked tired, but there was a small smile that sparked something inside Sophia. "He's alive," he said, and she felt such immense relief that she could barely breathe. But before she could celebrate, he continued. "The surgery was successful, but he's still far from out of danger. The next few days will be crucial." Sophia nodded, determined to do whatever it took to help Charlie recover. They allowed Sophia to see Charlie for a few minutes. He was lying in a small cage connected to tubes and monitors that beeped steadily. He looked so small and fragile, but Sophia saw something in his eyes, a spark of life that filled her with hope. "You're going to be okay, my love. I promise," she said, gently stroking his head. No matter how uncertain the future was in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. Sophia stayed by Charlie's side as long as the clinic staff allowed her to that night. The small dog's body rose and fell with weak but steady breaths. The machines connected to him blinked and emitted rhythmic sounds, almost as a reminder that there was life there, even if hanging by a thread. She refused to leave, but Dr. Moretti insisted that she needed to rest. "You need to be strong for him in the coming days," he said. Those words rang true but were hard to accept. How could she rest when Charlie was fighting for his life? Back at the small rented room she had managed to secure near the clinic, Sophia could barely sleep. The bed was uncomfortable, but that wasn't what bothered her. Her mind was spinning in a whirlwind of thoughts. Had she made the right choice? Was Charlie suffering? What if he couldn't pull through? The questions came like an avalanche, and guilt was the heaviest burden to bear. Still, she knew there was no alternative. All she could do was wait and pray. The next morning, Sophia was back at the clinic before the sun even rose. She brought a blanket from home for Charlie, the same one he loved to curl up in on colder days. When she saw him still lying there with his eyes half closed, her heart ached. He looked so small, so fragile, but there was something different about him. His breathing was a little more stable, and she thought she saw his tail move slightly. "You're fighting, my brave boy," she whispered as she placed the blanket over him and gently stroked his head. Dr. Moretti entered the room and confirmed that Charlie was responding better than expected. He was still far from out of danger, but that small improvement was already a miracle to Sophia. She felt a wave of gratitude so strong that she had to hold back tears. The vet explained that the next step would be to see how he would react without the help of machines. If he can breathe on his own in the next 24 hours, his chances increase significantly, he explained. Sophia nodded, determined to be there for every second of the process. As she waited, Sophia began to think about everything Charlie had done for her over the years. He wasn't just a dog, he was a savior. When Arthur died, she thought she would never find joy in life again. The days were gray and the silence in the house felt unbearable. It was Charlie, with his contagious energy and loyalty, who pulled her out of that hole. He was there when she cried, licking her tears. He made her laugh with his little antics, like hiding her slippers or trying to jump on the bed, even though he knew it wasn't allowed. That afternoon, Sophia decided to call her daughter, something she didn't do often since the family had moved to another city. Their contact had become sporadic, almost formal. When she told her what was happening, the reaction was a mix of surprise and concern. "Mom, you should have called me earlier. Why didn't you ask for help?" Sophia hesitated. She didn't want anyone to think she was losing control. "I just needed to do this on my own," she replied, her voice firm but not hiding the emotion. Her daughter promised to visit as soon as she could, but Sophia knew she was too busy to drop everything. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Charlie managed to breathe on his own for a few hours, but then needed assistance again. Sophia felt like every small victory came with a new challenge. Dr. Moretti remained optimistic but realistic. He explained that the experimental treatment was still unpredictable. "We're in uncharted territory, Sophia. He's strong, but we need patience." Patience was something Sophia had never had in abundance, but for Charlie, she was willing to wait as long as it took. On the night of the third day, something different happened. Charlie opened his eyes fully and tried to lift his head. It was a small movement, but significant. Sophia was by his side and held his paw. "That's it, my love. You're coming back to me," she said, tears streaming down her face. She called Dr. Moretti immediately, and he confirmed it was a great sign. Charlie's improvement seemed slow but steady. For the first time, Sophia began to believe that maybe he really had a chance to pull through. Charlie's recovery was full of ups and downs, like an emotional marathon for Sophia. Every improvement was celebrated as a victory, but every setback brought with it the fear of losing him. On the toughest nights, she would sit by his side, telling stories about the happy moments they had shared, as if her words were a shield against the darkness. "Do you remember, Charlie?" she would whisper, holding his paw. "That day you chased the ball and fell into the pool? You almost gave me a heart attack." Even though he lay still, Sophia was sure he could hear her. At the clinic, she began to meet other people who were also there fighting for their pets. Each story was a reminder of how these four-legged companions became an essential part of their owners' lives. Sophia grew particularly close to a young woman who was caring for a cat with kidney failure. "He's everything to me," the woman said, one day stroking the feline. Sophia simply nodded. No explanation was needed. The love they shared for their animals transcended words. As the days passed, the signs of Charlie's improvement became more evident. He began to eat again, starting with small portions of liquid food, then moving on to his favorite kibble. Sophia watched each step forward with tear-filled eyes and a heart that felt a little lighter. "You're coming back, my warrior," she would say, gently holding his face. To her, every movement, every glance was proof that she hadn't made the wrong decision in fighting for him. However, not everything was good news. The cost of the treatment began to weigh heavily. Sophia had never had much in savings, living solely on her husband's pension. She started selling some of her belongings to cover the expenses. The old sewing machine, which she hadn't used in years, was the first to go. Then she sold a set of dishes that had been in the family for decades. "They're just things," she told herself, trying not to think about the emotional weight of each item she let go. Sophia's daughter realized the gravity of the situation and insisted on helping, sending some money. "You don't have to, sweetheart." Sophia tried to argue, but her daughter was firm. "Mom, this is for both of you. You deserve it." Despite her initial resistance, Sophia accepted the help, feeling grateful not to be completely alone in this journey. Still, most of the struggle was hers, and she was willing to go to the end. Over time, Charlie began to walk again. His steps were slow and uncertain, but they were steps. Sophia held his leash carefully, encouraging him to keep going. "That's it, buddy, 1 foot at a time." He seemed to understand the effort being made for him, and his loyalty to Sophia had never been more evident. In moments when she felt tired or discouraged, all she had to do was look into his eyes to find the strength to keep going. A return to normal life seemed closer, but Sophia knew nothing would ever be the same. Charlie was a survivor, and so was she. What they had been through together in the past few months had transformed them in ways she could hardly explain. Every day they spent together was a reminder of how fragile yet precious life was. And above all, it was proof of the power of love and determination. Sophia began to wonder if others could ever understand the depth of the bond she shared with Charlie. To her, he wasn't just a dog. He was an extension of her very soul. That night, as she watched Charlie sleeping peacefully beside her, Sophia felt a strange mix of relief and unease. As much as things were stabilizing, something inside her knew that this story wasn't over yet. It was as if a new chapter was about to begin. Though she had no idea where or how, all she knew was that she would do anything to protect Charlie and preserve the unique connection that bound them together. In the following days, Sophia devoted herself entirely to Charlie's rehabilitation. Every step, no matter how small, was a victory celebrated as a major event. She began taking him on short walks around the clinic grounds. The leash remained firmly in her hand, and her eyes never left him for a second. Charlie still limped, but his determination was evident. Even though he was weak, he seemed eager to regain his life by her side. "You never give up, do you, my hero?" Sophia whispered as she watched him take short, tentative steps. Sophia's routine had completely changed. She now woke up before dawn to prepare the special food Charlie needed, a mixture recommended by Dr. Moretti to strengthen his system. Then she spent the rest of the day caring for him, taking breaks only to rest or reflect on everything they had been through up to that point. How did it all come to this? She sometimes wondered, looking at Charlie lying on the couch, exhausted but at peace. It was a question that never had a clear answer. One afternoon, Sophia decided to revisit the Yao Park where it all began. It was hard to return to the place that had almost cost Charlie his life, but she felt it was necessary. When they arrived, she took a deep breath and looked around. Some people recognized the pair and waved from a distance, as if they understood the strength it had taken for her to be there again. Charlie seemed calmer than she had expected, walking beside her with a curious but cautious expression. It was as if he, too, was exercising his own demons. As they walked, Sophia noticed something she had never paid attention to before: the small interactions between other people and their dogs. She saw a boy running with a Labrador puppy, an elderly woman stroking her poodle while reading a book, and even a group of friends laughing as they threw a frisbee to a German shepherd. The connection between humans and animals was something that had always gone unnoticed by her until everything she had been through with Charlie. Now every scene seemed to carry a deeper meaning. When they returned to the clinic that night, Sophia found Dr. Moretti waiting for her with an envelope in his hands. He explained that he had been closely following Charlie's progress with great interest, and that his recovery had been impressive, even by the experimental standards of the treatment. "You may not realize it, Sophia, but Charlie is making history here," he said with a smile. She remained silent for a moment, trying to understand what that meant. It was hard to think about anything other than simply having him by her side. But even with the good news, there was a weight Sophia couldn't ignore. The battle wasn't over yet. Charlie was better, but he still needed constant care and frequent checkups. She knew the road ahead would be long, and that she would need strength, both physical and emotional, to keep going. "You're stronger than you think," Dr. Moretti said during one of their conversations, trying to reassure her. Sophia just smiled. She didn't feel strong. She felt like just a woman who loved her dog more than anything in the world. That night, Sophia decided to start writing in a journal, something she hadn't done since she was young. She grabbed an old notebook, sat at the table with a cup of tea, and began to put her thoughts on paper. She wrote about Charlie, about the fear of losing him, and about how he had been the light in her life during the darkest moments. The words flowed naturally, as if she were talking to an old friend. It was a way to process everything that had happened, and at the same time, a way to remind herself that every moment mattered. Charlie, now lying on his makeshift bed in the corner of the room, watched Sophia as she wrote. His eyes were more alive, and his breathing was calm. He seemed to understand that he was home again, surrounded by the unconditional love of his owner. And in that moment, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: a deep sense of peace. No matter what the future held, she knew she had done everything she could for him, and for her, that was enough. The following days brought a more stable routine for Sophia and Charlie, but the fear of a relapse was always present. At every clinic appointment, Sophia made sure to hang on Dr. Moretti's every word, absorbing all the information and advice as if they were rules for survival. Charlie no longer needed as many machines, and although he was still recovering, he seemed more like himself. His tail wagged more often, and he even insisted on playing with his old rubber ball, even if only for a few minutes before tiring out. During a short walk around the neighborhood, Sophia noticed something she hadn't before. People who used to just wave now stopped to ask about Charlie, to hear his story, or even offer help. One neighbor left a bag of dog food at her door, saying they wanted to contribute in some way. A teenager she barely knew showed up with a new leash, saying Charlie deserved something special. Sophia had never expected this kind of solidarity, but the gratitude she felt was immense. People still have kindness in their hearts, she thought. On a particularly sunny morning, Sophia decided to take Charlie to a place he loved, the neighborhood community garden. The place was more vibrant with flowers than she remembered, and Charlie seemed excited to explore the scents coming from the flowers and trees. Sophia sat on a bench while watching him, holding the leash firmly, but allowing him a little freedom. It was there, in that simple and serene moment, that she felt for the first time that things were truly getting better, but there was still a shadow hanging over everything. Sophia knew that the emotional and financial toll of it all had left deep marks. The house felt emptier without the items she had to sell, and she often caught herself mentally calculating how she would afford Charlie's medications. Despite it all, she never regretted it. For her, no sacrifice was too great. Charlie was her family, and she would do it all over again if she had to. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Charlie lying at her feet, Sophia began to reflect on how her life had changed since that fateful day. Before the incident, everything had seemed predictable, a routine that, while peaceful, lacked excitement. But now each day felt like a battle won. Every small progress Charlie made was a reason to celebrate. It's funny how the simplest things can become the most important, she thought as she gently stroked the dog's ears. Charlie, for his part, seemed to be coming back to life. He could now walk longer distances and even barked at the birds, something he hadn't done in weeks. Sophia felt an indescribable joy seeing him return to his old habits. It was as if the bond between them had grown even stronger, something she never thought possible. The love between them now felt almost tangible, a connection so deep that words could never describe it. But Sophia also knew she couldn't ignore the impact of what had happened. She started avoiding the street where she had encountered the police officer, feeling a mix of anger and fear whenever she thought about that day. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night with the sound of Charlie's whimper echoing in her mind. It was as if a part of her was still trapped in that traumatic moment, unable to fully move on. Despite this, she didn't let fear define her. Charlie needed her, and that was enough to keep her strong. The next morning, Sophia received an unexpected call from her daughter. It was an invitation to spend a few weeks at her house, something that hadn't happened in years. Sophia hesitated. She didn't want to leave Charlie at such a delicate time, but her daughter reassured her, saying he was welcome. "Maybe it'll be good for both of you," she said. Sophia agreed, knowing that a change of scenery might be beneficial, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that a fresh start might be within reach. The trip to her daughter's house was an event in itself. Sophia hadn't traveled in years, and the thought of leaving home with Charlie made her nervous. She spent hours organizing his things, his medications, his special food, his favorite blanket, and even the old ball he wouldn't let go of for anything. Deep down, she was afraid that the change of environment might harm him, but at the same time, she knew she needed to try something different. It was an opportunity to rest, even though rest seemed like a distant luxury. Charlie seemed more excited than Sophia had expected. During the car ride, he kept looking out the window, ears perked, up and tail wagging slightly. Sophia felt a pang in her heart as she watched the scene. It was as if for a moment everything was normal again, like in the old days. The landscape rushing by, the sound of the radio playing old songs, and Charlie by her side. It was all so simple, yet so precious. When they arrived, the reception was warm. Sophia's daughter, Laura, opened her arms to hug her, something she hadn't done since Arthur was still alive. The grandchildren came running, curious to meet Charlie. "He's smaller than I imagined," said the youngest one, carefully petting the dog. Charlie seemed to enjoy the attention, and Sophia couldn't help but smile. For a brief moment, she felt like maybe everything was really getting better. Laura's house was spacious and full of life, a stark contrast to Sophia's quiet home. At first, it was hard to get used to the constant noise of the children and the movement around the house. But soon she began to appreciate the energy of the place. Charlie also seemed revitalized. He followed the kids around the living room, trying to keep up with their energy, even though he still got tired quickly. For Sophia, it was like watching a part of life she had left behind. During the quiet night, Sophia and Laura talked on the porch, something they hadn't done in years. Laura wanted to know everything: how Sophia had been handling the challenges, how she was managing to care for Charlie, and most importantly, how she herself was feeling. Sophia, hesitant at first, eventually opened up. She talked about her fears, her doubts, and the sense of loneliness that had followed her since Arthur's death. Laura listened intently, holding her mother's hand at times. "I should have been there more," she said, her eyes welling up. Sophia just smiled. "We're here now. That's what matters." The days passed too quickly for Sophia. She began to feel at home, something she hadn't expected. Every morning she took Charlie for a walk around the yard while the grandchildren played nearby. He seemed to be returning to his old self, barking at squirrels and chasing leaves falling from the trees. His progress was more than Sophia could have imagined when she decided to face it all, her heart filled with gratitude with every little moment. However, a restless feeling began to creep in. Sophia knew her stay there was temporary. Soon she would have to return home, to the routine that now felt distant. And though Charlie was recovering, there was something in his eyes that worried her. It was as if he was more tired than she wanted to admit. Dr. Moretti had mentioned that a full recovery would take time, but Sophia feared that time might not be on her side. It was a thought she tried to push away, but one that never completely disappeared. On the last night before heading home, Sophia sat with Charlie in the garden. The sky was clear and the stars shone brighter than she remembered. "Are you ready to go back?" she asked him as if expecting an answer. Charlie looked at her, tilting his head the way he used to as a puppy. Sophia smiled, but there was a lump in her throat. Something inside her knew that this trip, however short it had been, would mark a turning point. What came next was still a mystery. The journey back home was uneventful but filled with emotions. Sophia felt a mix of relief at being back in her own space and a longing for the hustle and bustle of her daughter's house. Charlie seemed tired but content, curling up in his blanket as soon as they crossed the threshold. Sophia looked around, noticing how quiet the house felt. The absence of children's laughter and the constant activity of the past few weeks made her home feel even emptier. Still, she knew this was their place where everything had begun and where somehow she found comfort. In the days that followed, Sophia settled back into her routine. She prepared Charlie's meals, checked his medication, scheduled and organized the short walks he loved so much. Each day seemed a little easier, but she knew it was too soon to let her guard down. Dr. Moretti constantly reminded her that Charlie's progress was remarkable, but there were still risks. Sophia would thank him with a smile, but the weight of his words stayed with her. After all that mattered was making sure Charlie was safe and comfortable. One afternoon, while organizing some boxes in the basement, Sophia came across an old photo album. Inside were pictures of Arthur, herself, and Charlie as a puppy, running around the backyard. She sat on the floor and carefully flipped through each page, as if revisiting another life. The photos brought back memories of simpler times, but also reminded her of how far they had come together. Sophia realized that Charlie wasn't just a part of her life. He was the link that connected her past to her present. Inspired by the photos, Sophia decided to create a special space in the house for Charlie. She took one of the most beautiful pictures of him, placed it in a simple frame, and hung it in the living room, next to a shelf where she kept his favorite toys. It was a quiet tribute, but one that filled her heart with joy. When she showed the space to Charlie, he seemed to understand. He approached the shelf, sniffing his toys, and then lay down at its base. Sophia laughed to herself. "You always know how to surprise me," she said as she watched him. Although things were returning to normal, Sophia began to notice small signs that worried her. Charlie seemed sleepier than usual and sometimes refused his food, something he never did. She called Dr. Moretti immediately, who reassured her that some fluctuations were expected during the recovery process. Even so, Sophia couldn't shake her concern. Every whimper, every slower movement was a reminder of how fragile he still was. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, Sophia heard a strange noise coming from the living room. She rushed in and found Charlie trying to stand, but his legs seemed weak. Her heart raced. "It's okay, my love. I'm here," she said, helping him lie down again. She stayed awake beside him, holding his paw and silently praying. That moment brought back all the fear she thought she had overcome. It was a cruel reminder that no matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't control everything. The next day, she took him back to the clinic. Dr. Moretti ran some tests and assured her there was nothing alarming, but he suggested extending Charlie's rest period. Sophia returned home with Charlie in her arms, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. He seemed comfortable, but the episode from the night before had shaken her confidence. She realized that despite all the progress, there was still a long journey ahead. In the weeks that followed, Sophia focused on creating a new routine that prioritized Charlie's rest. The walks became even shorter, and she dedicated more time to quiet activities like reading by his side or simply sitting with him in the backyard. Charlie seemed to appreciate these calm moments, and Sophia began to see the beauty in slowing down. Though the worry never completely disappeared, she found peace in simply being present, cherishing every moment with him. As the days went by, Sophia began to feel that her connection with Charlie had deepened in a way she never imagined possible. It wasn't just the fact that he depended on her, it was the way he seemed to understand everything she did. Every look from him felt like a thank you, every small movement a demonstration of trust. Sophia in turn rediscovered parts of herself she thought she had lost. Taking care of Charlie had given her a sense of purpose, something she hadn't felt since Arthur was gone. One morning as she drank coffee on the porch, Sophia heard the sound of the garbage truck approaching. Charlie, still weak, lifted his head and let out a small bark, just like he used to do every day before the incident. It was such a simple thing, but it made Sophia smile. "You're getting back to normal, my boy," she said, leaning over to pat his head. Those moments, no matter how small, were like reminders that life could still be good, even after so much suffering. Still, there was a constant weight in Sophia's chest. No matter how much Charlie improved, she knew his health was still fragile. Some nights she would wake up in the middle of the night to check if he was breathing, gently touching his chest to feel the movement. It was a habit she couldn't break, even though she knew he was stable. The fear of losing Charlie was like a shadow that followed her at all times. One afternoon, while tidying up the backyard, Sophia found an old tennis ball buried among the plants. It had been one of Charlie's favorite toys when he was younger. She washed it and brought it to him, hoping it might spark some joy. When she showed him the ball, he paused for a moment, staring at it as if trying to remember. Then slowly, he picked it up with his mouth and brought it to her feet. Sophia laughed, her voice filled with emotion. "I knew you hadn't forgotten," she said gently, tossing the ball to him. But the joy of that moment was interrupted the following night, when Charlie began to whimper softly in his sleep. Sophia rushed to him and noticed he was restless, as if having a nightmare. She gently woke him, stroking his head to calm him down. He opened his eyes and looked at her with a mix of confusion and sadness. Sophia felt her heart tighten. "I'm here, my love. You're safe," she whispered as he closed his eyes again. The next day, Sophia decided to take him for a short walk in a nearby park, something she hadn't done in weeks. She wanted him to feel the fresh air and see the world beyond the walls of the house. At first, Charlie seemed hesitant, but he soon began to walk with more confidence, albeit slowly. Sophia noticed he was more alert, observing the people and other dogs around them. It was as if, for a brief moment, he had forgotten everything that had happened. On their way back home, Sophia ran into an old acquaintance, an elderly man who used to walk his own dog around the neighborhood. They exchanged a few words and the man was surprised to see Charlie. "I thought he hadn't made it," he said, unaware of the impact of his words. Sophia felt a pang in her heart, but replied calmly, "He's a fighter, and so am I." The man smiled, nodding in agree. That night, as Charlie slept peacefully in his bed, Sophia sat beside him watching his steady breathing. It was a sight that filled her with gratitude, but also with a strange melancholy. She knew every day with him was a gift, something she would never take for granted again. But deep down, a persistent feeling told her that something was still coming, something that would change everything once more. The next morning, Sophia woke up with Charlie nestled beside her in bed, something that hadn't happened in a long time. He seemed calmer than he had been in recent days, breathing peacefully, almost as if he were savoring the moment to the fullest. Sophia stroked his head, feeling his soft fur between her fingers, and whispered, "You're the reason I still wake up smiling, you know?" Charlie lifted his head for a moment and licked her hand. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. Determined to make the most of the day, Sophia prepared a special breakfast for herself and a bowl of cooked chicken pieces for Charlie. As he ate slowly, she sat at the table watching his every move. Even though the vet had assured her that he was recovering well, she still felt a tightness in her chest, as if something were out of place. It was hard to explain, but the feeling was so palpable that it left her uneasy. Later, Sophia decided to take a longer walk around the neighborhood. The day was coming to an end. Charlie walked beside her, still slowly, but with a determination that filled Sophia with pride. "You're stronger than I am, you know," she said as they stopped in front of an old tree where Charlie used to play when he was a puppy. He looked at her with bright eyes, and Sophia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. During the walk, she came across some children playing on the sidewalk and stopped for a moment to chat. They were enchanted by Charlie, petting him gently as Sophia explained that he was recovering from a big scare. Seeing the children's affection for him brought a rare moment of lightness to her heart. It was as if, for a few minutes, all the fear and anxiety had disappeared, replaced by a sense of peace and connection. Back at home, Sophia spent the rest of the day tending to the garden, while Charlie rested in the shade. She loved seeing him napping, his body relaxed and his tail moving slightly as if he were dreaming. But at the same time, she couldn't help but glance at him from time to time, checking to make sure he was okay. Every movement of his seemed to carry greater meaning now. She had never noticed before how small things, like the way he breathed or the sound of his paws on the floor, could be so comforting. That night, as she sat in the armchair with a book in her hands, Sophia heard a sound that made her freeze. Charlie let out a small whimper, followed by heavier breathing. She dropped the book immediately and rushed to him, lying on the makeshift bed beside the couch. He looked at her, but his eyes seemed different, as if he were asking for something she couldn't understand. Sophia felt her heart race. "It's okay, my love." "I'm here," she said, trying to stay calm. Sophia spent the night by Charlie's side, monitoring his every movement. He seemed to alternate between moments of calm and others where he fidgeted restlessly, as if he were uncomfortable. In the early hours of the morning, she decided to call Dr. Moretti, who asked her to bring him in immediately. Sophia carefully placed Charlie in the car, feeling as though every second was crucial. As she drove toward the clinic, she spoke to him, trying to keep him calm. "You're the strongest dog I've ever known, Charlie. We'll get through this together." When they arrived at the clinic, Sophia was greeted with urgency. Dr. Moretti took Charlie to the exam room while she waited in the reception area, her heart heavy. The white walls and the smell of disinfectant seemed even more oppressive than before. Sophia sat in a chair, her hands trembling. She couldn't help but remember all the moments they had shared, from the happy days to the recent challenges they had faced. She knew this moment would be decisive, but she also knew she wasn't ready for what might come next. The silence in the waiting room was suffocating. Sophia tried to stay calm, but every passing second felt like an eternity. She clenched her hands tightly, interlacing her fingers as she stared at the door through which Charlie had been taken. That place which once symbolized hope now seemed filled with uncertainty. She tried to distract herself by looking at the posters on the wall, but nothing could lift the weight she felt in her chest. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her hold her breath. But it wasn't Dr. Moretti, it was just a staff member passing by. After more than an hour of waiting, the door finally opened and Dr. Moretti walked in. His face was serious, but there was a calmness in his expression that gave Sophia a glimmer of hope. "He's stable now, but we had to make some adjustments." To his medication, he explained, "Charlie is fighting, Sophia, but we need to be realistic. He's tired and his body is feeling it." Those words landed heavily on her. She nodded, trying to maintain her composure, but the lump in her throat felt impossible to hold back. Dr. Moretti led her to where Charlie was lying on a small bed with tubes connected to his body. He looked more fragile than ever, but he opened his eyes when he heard her voice. "Hi, my love," Sophia said carefully, approaching him. She held his paw, feeling the warmth that was still there, and let her tears fall silently. "You're so strong, stronger than I could ever be." Charlie tried to move his head as if he wanted to get closer to her, and that small gesture made her smile even through her tears. Sophia spent the rest of the day by his side, refusing to leave, even when the staff suggested she go rest. She knew every moment was precious and didn't want to waste a single second away from Charlie. While he slept, she whispered stories about the past, reminiscing about the days when he would run around the backyard and hide behind the bushes. "You've always been my adventure buddy, even in the smallest things," she said, her voice filled with emotion. That night, as Charlie slept, Sophia began to think about what Dr. Moretti had said about being realistic. She knew he was trying to prepare her, but the idea of losing Charlie was something she couldn't accept. He had fought so hard, survived so much that it felt unfair to think their time together might be running out. "I'm not giving up on you, my boy," she whispered, holding his paw tighter. "As long as you keep fighting, I'll fight too." The hours dragged on, and Sophia stayed by his side even as exhaustion took over. She dozed off for a few minutes but woke up when she felt Charlie stir slightly. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and for a moment he seemed more alert than before. Sophia smiled, feeling a wave of hope. "You're here with me, aren't you?" she said, stroking his head. He tried to wag his tail, but he was too weak. Still, that small movement filled Sophia with emotion. By morning, Dr. Moretti returned to check on him. "He had a quiet night," he said, as he performed a quick examination. "Now it's a matter of time, Sophia. We'll see how he responds in the next few hours." Sophia felt the weight of his words but thanked the vet. She returned to Charlie's side and continued talking to him, as if her words could bridge the space between them. Every minute felt like a battle against the inevitable, but Sophia refused to give up. Later, as she sat beside him, something inside Sophia shifted. She felt a strange calm, almost as if Charlie were trying to tell her something without words. He looked at her with a gaze that seemed to carry years of gratitude, love, and understanding. Sophia held his paw tightly as tears streamed down her face. In that moment, she realized that no matter what happened, the bond between them would never be broken. Charlie wasn't just a dog, he was a part of her. The following hours were intense for Sophia. She stayed by Charlie's side, watching every breath, every small movement. The clinic was quiet, but inside her, there was a whirlwind of emotions. It was hard not to think about all the times Charlie had been her anchor, her reason to keep going. She remembered how he used to sit beside her on lonely nights, resting, his head on her lap, as if to say everything would be okay. Now it was her turn to be strong for him. Sophia clung to every small sign of improvement, but Charlie's eyes seemed more tired than ever. He looked at her with a tenderness that broke her heart. Dr. Moretti came by regularly to check on him, but there was a silence in the veterinarian's words that Sophia couldn't ignore. It was as if everyone was waiting for something, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. Sophia felt the weight of that weight, but she refused to give up. That night, as Charlie slept deeply, Sophia had a moment of reflection that felt bigger than herself. Sitting beside him, she realized how that little dog had transformed her life. He hadn't just filled the void left by Arthur's death. He had taught her to love again, to laugh, to care. He was proof that even the darkest moments could be brightened by something as simple and pure as the companionship of a loyal friend. Around midnight, Charlie's breathing began to slow. Sophia noticed immediately and called Dr. Moretti, who arrived within minutes. He did what he could to stabilize him, but Sophia knew something was different. She held Charlie's paw tightly, whispering words of love and comfort as his eyes slowly closed. "I'm here, my love." "You're not alone," she said, tears streaming. Charlie gave Sophia one last look, a look that seemed to carry all the gratitude and love he had felt for her over the years, and then he stopped breathing. The silence that followed was devastating. Sophia continued to hold his paw, unable to accept what had just happened. Dr. Moretti stood by her side, respecting the moment, but offering no words that could comfort her. Sophia felt as though a part of her had left with Charlie. The next morning, Sophia returned home alone. The house felt emptier than ever. She placed Charlie's blanket on his bed and looked at the toys he had loved so much. Everything there was a reminder of his presence, but also of his absence. Sophia sat in the living room chair holding the photo she had placed on the shelf days earlier. For hours she stayed there, reminiscing about every moment they had shared, every smile he had brought to her life. As the days passed, Sophia began to notice something that surprised her. Though the pain of loss was immense, she felt a peace she couldn't explain. Charlie was gone, but the love he had brought into her life remained. He had taught her to cherish the small moments, to find joy in simple things, and above all, to never give up, even in the hardest times. It was as if he was still with her, in a way that went beyond the physical. A few weeks later, Sophia decided to do something she had never considered before. She began writing about her experience with Charlie, about how he had changed her life, and the unconditional love they had shared. She wrote without grand intentions, simply to keep his memory alive. But as she shared her story with a few people, she realized the impact it had. It was as if Charlie continued to inspire others, even after his passing, and in some way that gave Sophia the strength to move forward. Several months after Charlie's departure, Sophia still felt his presence in every corner of the house. But instead of sadness, she began to feel immense gratitude for everything he had meant in her life. One day, while organizing some things in the closet, she found a notebook where she had written down the details of her journey with Charlie. Their walks, the happy moments, the difficult days at the clinic. It was then that something began to take shape in her mind, like an idea that insisted on being realized. Sophia started writing more. She would sit at the table every morning and put down on paper every memory, every lesson she had learned from Charlie. It wasn't just a way to honor him, but also to process everything she had been through. Over time, her words became a testament to the power of unconditional love, the strength we find in the hardest moments, and the importance of cherishing the little things. One day, while walking through the park where it all began, Sophia saw something that made her stop. A young woman was sitting on a bench holding a small puppy in her arms. The dog had a clumsy way about him, wagging his tail and trying to lick her face. Sophia smiled. It was impossible not to think of Charlie in that scene. She approached, exchanged a few words with the young woman, and realized that she too was going through a tough time in her life. Before saying goodbye, Sophia said something she herself had never forgotten. Dogs don't just live with us, they show us what it truly means to live. Not long after, Sophia decided to share her story with a group of friends. It was a simple gathering, but the reactions surprised her. Many people were moved, and some shared their own experiences with their pets. It was then that Sophia realized she wasn't alone. The bond between humans and animals was something universal, something that connected people from different places and backgrounds. Charlie wasn't just a part of her life, he was a symbol of something greater. The decision to publish a small book about Charlie's story came almost by chance. Sophia, with Laura's help, gathered all her notes and wrote a simple yet deeply emotional book. The book wasn't ambitious, but it began to resonate with readers who identified with her journey. People sent letters, shared their own stories, and some even said that reading about Charlie had inspired them to adopt an animal or cherish the time they had with their pets more. The impact of the book was greater than Sophia could have imagined. But more than the success, what truly mattered to her was knowing that Charlie continued to live on through the words she had written. He wasn't just a memory, he was a source of inspiration for so many who needed a message of hope. "You're still with me, my love," Sophia would whisper to herself every time she received a new message or read a touching account from someone who had been moved by the story. In the last years of her life, Sophia found a purpose she had never imagined. She became an advocate for the connection between humans and animals, sharing stories, participating in events, and encouraging others to value this unique bond. Charlie might not have been physically by her side anymore, but his impact continued to grow. And deep down, Sophia knew that all of this was possible because even in the hardest moments, she had chosen love. The last time Sophia visited the park where she used to walk with Charlie, she looked up at the sky and felt a deep sense of peace. She knew life would always have its ups and downs, but the love and connection she had found with Charlie were eternal. "Thank you for everything, my friend," she whispered as the wind gently blew around her. And in that moment, she realized their journey had never truly ended. It had simply changed form. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we hope it has provided you with valuable lessons about love and patience. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update. Share this story to spread love and hope to more people. We are always committed to bringing you meaningful and emotional stories. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.